Okay. Dive number 2694. In 1993, during one of the expeditions for lava phenomena of the deep-sea submersible Alvin, an unexpected sequence was recorded along the bottom of the East Pacific rise at 2,500 meters deep. The first visual experience of two mating octopuses in their natural habitat. There are two males of two different species, unknown. A 400-watt light makes visible for 16 minutes the midnight zone where sunlight doesn't penetrate. Video was realized by WHOI Oceanographic institutions, and I thank them for the license of this footage. The expedition captain, Richard A. Luce, once landed, sent the film to Janet R. Voigt, a cephalopod scientist. The copulation footage leads Luce and Voigt to a paper. I had the pleasure of interviewing Janet Voigt to get closer emotionally to this first time. Her words: "When I finally watched it at the end of the day, I was amazed. I also waited until night to watch it. I agree with Voigt, the scientist. The footage is amazing. For her, beauty is the content visibility. For me, as visual artist, maybe for something else. To my eyes, there are two octopuses, different species, rolled over together, but I don't know if they are males or females and if it is sex or other. For Janet, it's all clear from the first glance. Sticking the ectocotylus, the male copulatory organ, into the mental cavity is typical of sexual mating. The footage. I'm hypnotized by this fluctuation. The silence sinks me into the image. I think about the effect of the light on their eyes, but they don't see. The rhythm of this robotic human control of the camera is hypnotic. I'm excited and cold. Alvin is 12 underwater lights, 4 visual recording devices, 2 hydraulic robotic arms. We, from the octopus's point of view, are Alvin. Like exposures and reframing, let emerge the charm of the raw material. The Betamax magnetic tape is closer to a 60mm rather than to digital 4K, dilating shadows and uncertainties. I project sexual intercourse on them, there where the scientist knows it is one. I'm happy this happens in the abyss where we imagine a saving energy formal life. Here's a demanding activity. An exuberance, I think. But compared to which energy system? I realize that I prefer to understand it as exorbitant rather than habitual. I think of how beautiful it would be to have a diorama of it in a National History Museum, wrapped in a black velvet. Among other dioramas that usually bore me, males fighting, females with cubs, a life theater embalmed in the patriarchal law of survival. Instead, they are 2 different species males having sex. At minute 11, breath increases. The ectocotylus penetrates the cavity. It is sex. I agree with the scientist, Janet Voigt. Which structures connect my sexuality to that of the octopuses of the scientist and mix them all with sexual images regulations? Hypervisibility, penetrating depth places this scientific material in proximity to a surveillance device, a perfect footage for an artistic space, or erotic material for someone. Consequences we believe to have under control often overturn perceptual hierarchies, watching for study, watching for enjoyment, watching to control. We are the only living creatures endowed with norms while looking at human sexuality, so what about looking at animal sex? The footage visual life becomes more complex when in relation to words. This never-before-observed data leads scientists to a paper based on other known species, and the hypothesis forces the image to exceed any word. In the 90s, the dicta that visual data can produce facts without questions is dismantled, but questions are determined by previous knowledges. According to Haraway, in 1990, it is not dismantled. I quote Haraway. These histories are stories about stories, reality reconstructed scientifically with a particular aesthetic, realism, and a particular politics, commitment to progress. We will attempt to repair this commitment, seeking support, as Eve Sedgwick suggests, even from a knowledge that seems hostile to us, extracting sustenance from the object of a culture. This first time is an effective experience. In Voigt words, the scientist, I was familiar with the stereotypical behavior of the copulating male, and I would not say I was shocked but surprised, certainly. Managing astonishment is complex. It concerns novelty. A disorganization immediately reorganized in the method. Which is the value of this video beyond words and in relation to them in 1993, in 2000, and today? The academic paper. The paper conclusion is relevant. I read it. This first account of copulatory behavior in deep-water octopods questions whether copulation between males of different species is a rare event. The apparent readiness to copulate may reflect adaptations to low mate availability of cephalopods, a group in which promiscuous mating occurs. We identify here two criticalities and their impact in different fields. One concerns the word promiscuity, that is not understood if it can be emptied of moral value. The second one is about the low mate availability, understood as a lack of females. Since the central question is if it is a rare event, how does one circumscribe promiscuity with non-promiscuous data? Voigt herself answers, the scientist, comparing it to similar species characterized by the same environment, the abyss, and class the cephalopods, which one has data. Scientists' question is important. This act can be common. Here, the term, moreover, seems to mean promixing an intrinsic property of a subject. A study held in 2016, analyzing more than 350 animal sexuality studies, responds to the word ambiguity, as pointed out by Sarah Jane Alger. This idea of promiscuity seems to mean different things to different people. The second point, the lack of females. This pyramidal sexual logic with the reproduction at the top and non-reproductive sexualities asserted to reproduction is a question. Jennifer Terry analyzes in 2000. Sexuality has come to be related more centrally to bodily pleasures, irrespective of the aim of reproduction. To many ethologists, however, the problems presented by non-reproductive sexual behaviors have to do mainly with how it disturbs or supplements heterosexual reproduction. The 1993 paper suggests this sexual act doesn't occur because they are two males, but because a female is missing. In other words, octopuses must reproduce. Therefore, they know how to recognize a male from a female, but they don't know that it is a male of another species, so that sexual act occurs anyway. What do octopuses know about sex at this point? This predetermined plan in which reproduction moves creatures, sometimes boycotted, is a familiar story. For example, in the 18th century, Carl Linnaeus' scientific research played the role of maintaining some Western sociocultural structures the botanists attributed to plants the Christian patriarchal system of his time, demonstrating that it was nature itself to provide, of course, the Christian understanding of sexuality. The two scientists observe in the footage a biological concatenation of functions, which is what they seek. It is not their role to represent the octopus otherwise than a physiological sac, but ours outside the field of knowledge. It is misleading, as written by Adolf Portman in 1948, to limit an external manifestation to just a secondary function of an inner engine, an assumption. The more exaggerated a manifestation appears on the surface, the more it is forced into a physiological sac. But we can exceed the physiological sac, reproduction, and, in Antonin Artaud's words, the judgment of God. Artaud shows us artistically how an atomistic criterion that identifies organs and functions can determine a much broader ideology and morality, internalized to such an extent to become an organ. The octopuses are breaking an organization, becoming a dynamic field of forces, or in the words of Antonin Artaud's, bodies without organs. 2001, an LGBT documentary. Part of the footage was included in 2001 in the documentary Out in Nature, Homosexual Behavior in the Animal Kingdom. The out refers to the coming out, and the initial graphic is rainbow flag. With an LGBT initial, it was 2001, so it was just LGBT. The promotional statement: can anybody of those who claim homosexuality is unnatural explain this beastly behavior? It shows the logic put in place in the name of the rainbow flag 20 years ago. It represents a minority scientific approach in a frightened territory of public opinion. The logic is to demonstrate that there are various animal sexualities that can be considered natural. The problem here is to shake the notion of nature itself. If it works exclusively in a system where reproduction is the core, if in this documentary nature means a super machine taming creatures to accomplish the reproductive mission, even with the intention of displaying a proliferation of sexualities, it compromises the chance of thinking non-reproductive sexualities outside of nature against nature binarism, subjugating non-reproductive sexualities in that logic. Having said that, it is clear why the octopus voice off, that it's not here, but in the documentary version, there's a kind of homophobia. A male voice, a documentary classic, establishes who tells the true wild stories, but also lets emerge that a doc female voice-off remains an interdict, even in an LGBT space. We hypothesized that in 2001, some sexualities, until then marginalized, were ready to be included, but that pop media communication had to take place through a certain type of speaking subject and register. In Octopus is seen the voice-off and music sink into horror. In the sensationalism construction, there seems to be a certain ranking of shock. They are males, two different species, in the abyss, and its sex. Is this a public opinion burlesque? We suppose that in 2001, media visibility introduces a sort of naturalization, but it does not make them less frightening. If anything, it spectacularizes, ironically or not, our own fears. Conclusion and release. The relation between visual sexuality and text generate exorbitance. That is a disproportionate addition, but also literary, a departure from an orbit. We exaggerate the octopuses, then it means visibility and surveillance. The double surprise, good in scientists and scary in the media, has maintained its visibility. Visibility has placed this sexuality under scrutiny, but also available for reinterpretation. Overflowing it into creative fields has diversified its beauty. The relation we can build with it, in the words of Rita Fensky, is grounded in a stance that looks to a work of art for solace and replenishment, rather than viewing it as something to be interrogated and indicted. Relief encourages an aware intimacy. If this footage could potentially stimulate ideas, after 30 years it has fully improved it, investigating hybrid animal and human sexualities, inventing new relations, and a question. Once we get used to it, will it still be extraordinary? Let's imagine now our diorama in a museum. We are those inside that diorama, hyperrealistic statues against a painting backdrop illuminated by neon, and not those outside in front of it.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.